talk 4, Traditional Chinese Culture and Chinese Modernization.
So, Professor Gao, I've noticed that you have been attaching great importance to the cultural dimension in understanding Chinese modernization and the Chinese nation. So, can you share with us your opinions about the relationship between traditional Chinese culture and Chinese modernization in more detail?
Well, let me just make a very brief introduction about some Western academic achievements in talking about importance of tradition. As far as I know, quite a lot of intellectuals in the Western society, they think highly of the importance of tradition and culture. For example, after the burst out of the Western capitalism society, actually in the 19th century, in the 20th century, a lot of leading intellectuals, they made a very strong criticism on capitalism society by means of thinking highly of the importance of tradition and culture. They say, go back to the culture, go back to the tradition, and try to store like a kind of pre-modern society. The reason here sometimes is not that kind of standing, but obviously we draw the conclusion here is there must be something that is very much worth learning for us for generation after generation from the tradition and the culture. Well, let me give you 2 typical examples. Now, one is Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke is the 18th century's British intellectual. Edmund Burke think the importance of tradition is a decisive factor for the making of the contemporary policy. A policy is successful or not, or a system is feasible or not, is workable or not, is largely based on whether it could successfully echo with its tradition and with its with its history. So another one is Hegel, and he is a philosopher, strongly argue the uniqueness of certain culture in the spiritual level. Say each culture has its national spirit. Now, national spirit, but where the national spirit lie? The national spirit lies in what? Lies in culture, lies in its tradition. Now, very interesting thing here. He argued the validity of the law system is not based on the abstractive law, but based on what? He said, well, based on its culture, based on its culture, based on its tradition, based on its folk culture, based on some invisible cultural factors that invisibly, imperceptibly, however, decisively determines our performance, our behavior.
Invisible, but tangible, but real.
Yes, it is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. So any political ambition, any cultural cause, any social development style and mode must be successful in correspondence to its tradition and culture, or it is doomed to be a failure.
This reminds me of the example of Napoleon, the great historical figure. He tried to, the way I remember it, he tried to transplant the French system back then to rule Spain, but then he was doomed to fail because these 2 countries had totally different or largely different traditions and cultures.
Yes, Karl Marx himself is a very good scholar in observing even the very, very intricate, very, very minute difference between cultures. And however, this is a decisive factor to success or failure. Absolutely.
So if the tradition and culture of a country are so important for its development, then the traditional culture of China, traditional Chinese culture, must also be very important for us to understand the Chinese modernization. Do you think so?
Yes, but allow me to point out, it is more than understand. It is more than understanding. It is actually It is very much visible. It is very much tangible in our social practice. Now, if the Chinese culture, no matter how beautiful it is, if the Chinese culture in the contemporary, in the current society, is dead culture, is just existent on the paper, is just existent in the textbook,
in the museum.
yeah, in the museum, is for the target of the anthropology studies. It has no meaning at all for our real practice. Fact is, the Chinese culture is a lively, decisive, important factor in determining what kind of road we take in our modernization. As we said again and again, it is kind of very, very, fundamental power that shape our ideology, that decide, forged our value system. It is visible. It is everywhere in our daily life. So that is why our modernization practice must be in response to the Chinese traditional culture. And in this sense, we also want to, look at it from the other perspective. Never say, well, Chinese culture, traditional culture is important. Then we transplant it fully, completely, moved it into the current social life. This is not the Chinese way to learn from the tradition and the culture.
We have to adapt traditional cultural traditions to the contemporary social conditions.
Yes, that is why we must stick to the point that we must be creative in learning from the traditional culture. We must be innovative in transplanting the essentials of traditional culture into the contemporary culture practice. That is how we, value, treasure, and make full use of our tradition and culture.
And that is by doing that, that is the way we revitalize traditional culture and make sure that it stays alive.
Yes, that is also a part of our vitality of the nation. Yes.
Now, can we get down to more details? I mean, the details about these more specific features of the traditional Chinese culture.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, this is really a very huge task because the Chinese traditional culture is very profound and very of long history. However, if we just simply draw some, conclusions or some basic points from the traditional Chinese culture, we would say the Chinese culture has some very unique features. Oh, as far as I remember, last year, June the 2nd, the central government of China held a conference with the participation of different groups, circles of people, and some scholars and leading scholars, and had discussion about the specific features of Chinese traditional culture. And as she pointed out, the traditional Chinese culture have some 5 very important features. As far as I remember, the first one is that it's continuousness.
Yes, we know the Chinese culture has a very long history, more than 5,000 years long.
Without a stop.
Right.
Now, a lot of nations have its cultures continuous, but talking about continuousness, the Chinese culture from its very, very origin and the beginning till now, the principal, fundamental, primary thoughts and ideas is always, inherited generations after generations. That is very unique. That is very, very brilliant. Besides continuity, the Chinese culture is characterized by, say, creativity, by peacefulness, by unity, and by inclusiveness. And these features actually constitute the primary characteristics of Chinese traditional culture. And never say it is just a theory on the paper. It is lively facts, it is lively power that shape and reshape our policy, our orientation, our view, our horizon of the world. So they are very, very tangible factors, elements in the making of our society. They are the decisive powers that determine, that shaped our policy direction.
Speaking of these basic features, especially the feature of the peacefulness, it reminds me of the traditional Chinese history. I mean, in Ming Dynasty, China was, like, militarily speaking, the most powerful, at least one of the most powerful countries in the world. It built these great fleet led by Zheng He.
Yes.
However, the fleet was not used to colonize, to wage wars against other countries. In fact, the fleet became a vehicle, a symbol of economic and cultural exchange.
Yeah, envoy to the other cultures.
Right.
Yes, yeah. Talking about the peacefulness, actually, you can refer to quite a lot of masterpieces in the classical Chinese traditional works. For example, even in the Analects by Confucianism, you can find, for example, there's a sentence like, if people in the distant nations, they disagree with our culture, the solution here is not to conquer the people there, but to improve and heighten our own culture so as to be friendly, accommodate different opinions, and to welcome them to join us and enjoy the peaceful our environment in this sense. So, and also I'm going to point out, when you talk about the Zheng He, in the contemporary time, the other fleet led by Columbus, which actually conquered the America and discovered the American continent. And the fact is, Zheng He's fleet by scale is much, much larger than Columbus. But Zheng He's mission is to bring peace and build up friendly relationship. The other fleet's Columbus mission is to discover a new world so as to explore and ride. So that is quite different. Also, if you observe the current Chinese foreign policy, you can find the peacefulness, which inherited from our tradition and culture, is fully manifested in the current policy adoption of the Chinese government. We always stick to peace and development, always stick to the principle of mutual benefits, always stick to the win-win contract. This is the Chinese style of foreign policy in response to the peacefulness as our characteristics.
So we've been discussing the features of the traditional Chinese culture and its relationship with the socialism with Chinese characteristics. But we know, as a socialist country, China upholds Marxism as the guiding ideological principle or rule. So what is the relationship, in your opinion, between Marxism and traditional Chinese culture? Are they compatible in any way?
Talking about the ideological resources of Chinese modernization, I think three branches should be very much emphasized. First one, Chinese traditional wisdom and culture. Second, very important, Western modernization theory. Because we know that modernization originated from Western culture. The third is Marxism. As we all know, how important Marxism is as a very important theoretical approach and perspective critic upon the Western capitalism culture. And even nowadays, when we go on the way of socialism with Chinese characteristics, when we are still in a time when the world is characterized and overwhelmed by that kind of tendency of globalization, we can see capitalism and its culture is still a very influential existing power in this world. In this sense, our socialism with Chinese characteristics can never get away from the primary principles of Marxism. And it is still the time we always learn from and borrow ideas from the original Marxism expressions. However, as you ask the question, Does Marxism as a theory is compatible or not with our traditional culture and wisdom? This is really a brilliant question. And let me share you just with one point. Marxism is a very exceptional Western philosophy, which is not characterized by the Western philosophical tradition of metaphysics. But Chinese traditional philosophy and ideology is also going out of the Western metaphysical tradition. Both theories or both branches of wisdom actually have at least one principle in common. Keep sticking to the principle of practice instead of theory. The real theory, the lively theory, is always coming from practice, coming from historical conditions, coming from social realities. This is the common, Marxism in common with the Chinese traditional wisdom. So in this sense, I think Marxism is absolutely complementary with Chinese traditional wisdom.
This part is a bit theoretical, but let me try to summarize what you have just said. Basically, both Marxism and traditional Chinese culture are not, unlike the metaphysics, the main stem of the Western culture, are not paying attention to abstract ideas or theories.
Yes.
But are putting practice before theory.
Yes.
And correct theories come from correct or the real practice.
Yes.
And we have to adjust the theories according to the practice. And if I have to summarize this point in just one sentence, I'm thinking this key idea, which was first put forward by Lenin, that is, we have to analyze specific problems in specific details.
Yes, I like the word specific, or we say concrete.
Yeah, concretization.
Yeah, concrete, specific situations give birth to and provide a solution for the specific and concrete problems. This is Marxism, and this is also in response to Chinese wisdom, because we are always living in the changing world, changing society. This is some principle we have to stick to in the future.